Good morning, Janice.
Morning.
Today we'll talk about what happens to your debt when you die. Now, you probably don't want to burden your kids or your family with your debt when you die. That wouldn't be a great legacy, right?
No, not at all.
So we'll cover today all the ins and outs of death and debt and what happens what happens to your debt when you die, or if you're going through an estate right now, making sure that you understand what debts you have to pay or don't have to pay. Yeah.
Okay, today we're going to cover when heirs do not inherit debt, some explanations or exceptions, I should say, and then why debt collectors keep calling heirs. Good times.
And then lastly, make sure you stay to the end because I'll explain how heirs can actually turn the tables on the debt collectors and even increase their inheritance. So that'd be cool.
Oh, empowerment. I love it. So if it's your first time here, you know that Anthony wrote a book, How Probate Worked, available on Amazon. Not to mention that there's almost 20 years of experience here. So let's get started.
Cool. So number one, just generally, heirs do not inherit debt. Right? That's an important general concept to understand. So generally, when the debt dies with the borrower, and then the borrower's estate, this new entity that comes into existence, will pay only to the extent it can. All right. So when somebody dies, their assets and their debts all get thrown into a pot, into an entity called the estate, and then you'll see what happens. Can you explain what happens when it's a positive, Janice?
Absolutely. I love the pot analogy. It's all in one pot. So when the estate is positive, the heirs will inherit money. How this works is, let's say there's a $100,000 house, $30,000 mortgage. Do the math. That leaves you now with 70. So let's say that they have a $30,000 credit card or a culmination of credit cards. You're now down to 40, but the estate is still positive. There is still some money there. Granted, you'll have to sell the house and pay off those bills, but now that $40,000 left will go to the heirs.
Now let's use very good, thank you. Let's do an opposite example where the estate is actually net negative. In those cases, the heirs don't get anything, right? You don't inherit from a let's call it a bankrupt estate, even though that's a legal term. But the heirs do not owe the difference. All right, let me run through that. And in that scenario, just important to know, the creditors, meaning in this case the credit card company or the bank, they have to eat the loss. They're not allowed to come after you, usually. So so let's say grandpa passed away and he was a renter, he didn't own his home, and he pretty much spent what he had. He didn't really have a lot built up. So he died with just $5,000 in his checking account, but with $25,000 in credit card debt and medical bills. So if you do the math, grandpa's estate was negative $20,000. He had $5,000, but he owed $25,000, so he was negative $20,000. All right. I'm doing this nice and slow because we got some feedback that we did a lot of numbers really quickly.
A lot of math.
Okay, what happens there, right? Do the heirs have to reach into their own pocket and settle the $20,000 difference for the credit card companies and medical bills? No. The credit card companies and the hospital, they have to eat the loss. They absorb that loss. They write it off, whatever that means, right?
Right.
The heirs do not have to pay.
And that's definitely a misconception that we hear all the time that, oh, am I going to have to pay for what's remaining? But there are a couple of circumstances. For example, co-borrowers on a mortgage. If you co-sign for a mortgage, you'll be held responsible for that because you were equally responsible when they took the mortgage out. Another example, student loans. Like smaller student loans where the parents have co-signed on the children's loan. You can avoid this by some federal loans that don't, I guess the law's a little bit different, or they don't require co-signers for.
Generally federal loans don't require a co-signer. This is generally. And then private loans through private institutions do require a guardian or parent or a co-signer.
Right. So look at those federal ones maybe to keep you out of that. And then you have, of course, at the end, that some hospitals will nudge the families to co-sign on some of their bills. Of course, before you sign anything like that, talk to an attorney to see if you're really responsible for that.
Yeah, so that's a really tricky situation we've seen where your uncle is in critical condition or something in the hospital. And you're just trying to make sure that he gets the best possible care. You're not really counting dollars and cents in that moment, in that emotional state. And then the hospital administrator sort of puts a pile of papers in front of you and says, you need to sign these for us to continue care. you're not going to say, well, let me call my lawyer. I mean, that's kind of how it plays out.
Yeah.
But you should read those things carefully because you may be co-signing and guaranteeing a medical bill that you don't have to. So be careful there.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so the next exception is joint credit cards. This is typically with husband and wives where you are both co-signers on a credit card or a line of credit. So this is very similar. You're both co-signers, but but this is a very specific example of joint credit cards. Also, business partners often have joint credit cards. So just make sure that you mean to be joint credit line holders. An example of a setup that's more for convenience than actual joint credit would be an adult parent allowing their adult child to be on their credit card as an allowance kind of thing. So,
right.
Regardless of the whether or not that's a good idea for other reasons,
that's a whole other topic. Yeah,
that does result in both the parent and the child being liable for that credit line, which may not be your intention. So just make sure you're clear. Just be clear. FYI, this does not apply to authorized users. Which, for example, in my business, I have several paralegals who are authorized users under my business credit card. That's different from being a co-signer, right? So if you want to do that allowance thing with your kids, make an authorized user card. Don't make them a co-signer.
Right. So really what you're saying is look at what you're signing and see if you're going to be responsible down the road. I mean, really just look at it. Some states have community property, California and Texas, meaning that the spouses share equally in whatever they have, whether it's co-signed or joint or not. If you're married, it's joint property.
Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, it's...
Yeah. It's just their laws.
Yep. All right. So then, given all this, given these pretty clear rules, you might be wondering then, why do debt collectors call all the time after somebody passes away? And maybe you didn't know, but after somebody passes away, debt collectors are pretty aggressive in calling the surviving family and saying, hey, just because your aunt passed away doesn't mean you can ignore her debt. You're dishonoring. They can be really emotionally aggressive, like you're dishonoring her memory. Is this what you want her legacy to be, that she welched on her debts? They can be pretty in your face about it. So why do they do this? Because all too often it works, and they can pull the emotional heartstrings, or I don't want to use too harsh of a word, but I'm going to say trick the heirs into paying a debt they didn't have a legal obligation to pay. It's really gross. I think it's a
absolutely. I just don't think people understand. I mean, personally, before I get into this, I wouldn't have known if a debt collector called me and said, Grandma, owes this money. You need to pay it. I would have said, okay, I guess I'll figure it out. It's education.
I mean, it's getting bad enough that the FTC and even New York State recently have issued specific rules prohibiting debt collectors from misleading surviving families into thinking that they have to pay. But as we discussed in a previous podcast, as with all rules, there will always be loopholes or ways around it. And I'm sure what will happen is the debt collectors will either have a pre-recorded, you're not obligated to pay, something that's incomprehensible, or some sort of boilerplate terms and conditions where they technically disclose to you that you don't have to pay, but the actual words they use really make you feel like you're supposed to pay.
Right, absolutely. So how do you turn the tables on them? What do you do?
So this is the part that makes me really
There's got to be a way. Right.
So yeah, there's absolutely, once you're armed with this knowledge that, number one, you don't have to pay, and number two, if you're armed with some pretty healthy negotiating skills in an estate situation, not only will you not get scammed and not pay debts that you don't owe, that you don't legally have to pay, but if you can negotiate hard enough, you can actually significantly reduce the amount that you pay on these bills. I've actually personally knocked down bills to as low as 33 cents on a dollar. So let's say it was a $10,000 bill on behalf of the estate. I actually got the creditors to settle for $3,000 or $3,300. And when you do this, when you're aggressive and you negotiate hard, what happens? The result is I had $7,000 more to give to my heirs. I increased their inheritance by knowing the law, knowing where I stood, and flipping the script and getting really aggressive with the creditors. And I know it might feel sort of irresponsible or un-American to not pay your debts, but in this scenario, I'm okay with it. I don't know what to say. I'm okay with it.
There's rules, though. There's rules and there's laws to why you don't have to pay this. So if you want to learn more about probate, we've just talked about knowledge. I mean, this is really big. Check out the book, How Probate Works. It's really good information on, again, how it works, because most people going into this, they just don't know. The information's not out there. So check it out. It's on Amazon. If you want a chance for free books, giveaways, things like that. So you want to go to anthonyspark.com/join. Did I do that right? /join. put your name in. You'll be on the email list, and we'll send out information so where you can learn this new book's coming up, how to get free books, and then where to buy everything. Links are going to be in the description, and we'll do this again soon.
Cool. Thank you, Janice. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon.